Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Connections with myself, Cameron Bunch, and my father, Dr. Randy Lane Bunch. We skipped last week, and so we are on episode 95 this week. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about identity. It was based off a sermon I had done. If you want to check out our podcast, you can go back just 1 week or 2 weeks, I guess now, and find that podcast. And then there should also be a link to the sermon I did on my dad's Facebook and on his YouTube channel. Today, though, we're switching gears as we pretty much do all the time. And we're going to be talking about the idea of gifts and callings. And I think this idea has a lot of different meaning to different people. Uh, I think even the word gifts, if you talk to a secular person and you ask, like, what's your gift? They'd be like, I didn't bring a gift. I didn't know I was supposed to bring one. Was I supposed to bring you something? And it's an idea of a present, or you think of what you are gifted to do, and that's more akin to what we're referring to. And then calling, people have different meanings for this because different cultures have a idea of that when they are born, they are called to do a certain thing. I think in the Christian world, we would say that God gives us callings that we are to pursue. And then there's a lot of different meanings between the gifts and callings. And I've often mentioned in this podcast, and it's very true, that my favorite verse in the Bible is Romans 11:29. For the gifts and callings of God are without repentance, or as other translations say, are irrevocable. And the meaning behind this, and one of the reasons it's my favorite verse, is that God has given us different gifts and callings, and we'll get into that further. But he's never going to be apologetic. He's never going to try and change his mind and say, you know what? I gifted you with something and I need to take it away. Or I called you to something and I had plans for you, but you failed one too many times and I don't want you to try and go after that anymore. There might be times in our life where we make a mistake and God has to reroute us. However, I would say it is a lie of the enemy to say that once you've made a mistake, God is done with you, that there's nothing he can do to fix it. Because the God we serve is a God of redemption, a God that transforms and renews and changes and makes us new. And so we're going to dive into a bit of gifts and callings today and talk about the nuances of it, what we mean by it, and let's just open up the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just even using the word calling, again, it implies the idea that there's a voice involved. And, it's funny, we do have Christians, particularly on the more conservative side of things, that will say, well, I don't believe God speaks today. I believe he gave us the Bible and that's all we need and that kind of thing. We've, probably most of us have heard, or maybe even some people listening to this, that's where they stand. Um, if that's but the problem with that is I would say then, why are you in the ministry? And they would say, well, I felt called. You felt what? I felt called. What does that mean? Well, I felt God calling me. So we're right back to God speaks. When we say that God speaks, of course, we don't mean it in the sense of God is a spirit, so he doesn't have vocal cords. He communicates to our spirit through his spirit. The Bible said, he that's joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. If you look at Ezekiel's prophecies concerning the new birth, Jeremiah has one similarly. He says, I'll put a new heart within you, or I'll create within you a new heart, a new spirit I'll put within you, and I'll put my spirit within you, and you'll walk in my statutes and ordinances, so forth, and keep them. So the idea is that we're one spirit together with God. When we get born again, it's not a matter of turning over a new leaf. We're literally regenerated. I like to say it this way: we're regenerated. The word regenerated comes from two Greek words, palingenesis, literally means born again. So the idea is that we become partakers of the divine nature. We literally receive the life and nature of God, the Zoe life of God within us, and then his spirit is one together with us. And so how do we know we're even saved? Well, the spirit himself bears witness with our spirit. So sometimes we'll say it that way. I just had a witness in my heart. I just had a sense, a knowing. We're appealing to this intuitive sense of calling or God speaking to us. And anybody who's walked with the Lord very long has had experiences where they just sensed a pulling, a tugging. Sometimes we didn't even have words to articulate exactly what it was. But again, even when we're unsaved, we are the ecclesia. The church is the word ecclesia, literally means the called out ones. It was used in secular Greek literature for those who were called out, for example, to a public assembly in Greece. And so they would come out from among the general populace and go to this a called, specially called meeting. Well, we are the specially called of God, and anyone who hears the voice of God to salvation through the gospel and responds is hearing the voice of God through a preacher, through a friend sharing a testimony, at a Starbucks, but somehow through what they said, we heard something beyond what we heard with our physical ears. Jesus said that all the time, let him who has ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. So that's beyond just, hearing with our physical ears. So this idea of a call is this intuitive sense of destiny, that God has something significant and special, maybe unique, however you want to say it. And there's great verses that, key into that, like Ephesians 2:10, where his workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God has before ordained that we should walk in them. And you are the one, Cameron, who brought out the fact that, what is it? We get the word poem from, what's the Greek word?
Poema.
And so that means a poem. We're literally God's poetry, if you will. I like to say it this way: we're designer Christians, meaning that God specially and specifically designed each and every one of us for whatever task it is that he's called us to do. And so when we're talking about gifts and callings, one really helps to define the other. I know you and I have talked about this. People struggle to know the will of God. Not that long ago, we talked about, the will of God and so forth on this podcast and so forth. And so people are always wanting to know the will of God, and more particularly young men that maybe feel a call to ministry. Well, how do I know exactly what I'm called to? Because ministry is broad. Any area of service is ministry. I know great people in ministry who make their pastor shine by keeping the books well, or by, using their organizational gifts or their musical abilities, right? And they're on staff, they're in ministry, but they're not necessarily the primary teacher, communicator in the church. So ministry can be very broad. So people will say, well, how do I know what I'm called to do? Well, again, it's the gifts and calling. Your calling is defined by what you're gifted to do. So in other words, it's the gift that points to the calling or helps to identify the calling. Simply put, we see in the limitations of education in our day, for example, you get people that go through this academic process, they're taking tests, they're studying textbooks, when really their primary inclination or skill set is in, say, the trades. They're great mechanics or they're great woodworkers, and so, what they're learning in the classroom is certainly helpful on a basic level, but beyond that, they really need the more specified training that's adapted to their particular native talents or skills. And likewise, in the church, we're called of God. There's some things we're all uniquely called to do. I mean, corporately called to do, I should say, such as evangelism and worshiping God and fellowshipping with one another. But then there's, prayer is a universal call. In other words, yeah, some people are particularly graced with a prayer ministry, but everybody should pray. Some people are entrepreneurs and great givers. There's even spiritual gifts of giving that are mentioned in Romans 12, but everybody's to give, right? So there's some things that are common among all believers that are a calling, and the scriptures tell us about those. But when it comes to your specific calling, it really comes down to, what are you gifted to do?
And I think that we may see outliers in the Bible where it appears that a person is being called to do something in which they are not gifted. But I would argue that most of the time when you see those, their gifts are still being utilized either later on or in some facet. And what I mean by that is oftentimes people might point to Moses as someone, they're like, well, his whole thing was he had to go and speak to the Pharaoh, but he wasn't really gifted in that. No, his point is calling was to be the deliverer of Israel,
Yeah.
and to bring them into the promised land and to be a leader for them. He had that. He was someone that had humility. As the Bible says, he was the most humble man on the face of the earth. I mean, he exemplified humility, and that is what God needed, was someone who was humble, that would listen to God's voice and pursue him, especially someone that's going to be leading his people. He was taking them from to be the children of Israel to be the people of God. And so God was looking for someone that had a gifting in humility. I would absolutely say that is a gifting. It is something that you have to work on, develop. And he did so in the backside of the wilderness for 40 years. So I think our main model of someone that we look at as being very gifted in the Bible is Joseph. We look at him as exemplifying someone that no matter what environment he was in, he used his gifts to excel. And that's the thing, is that our gifts can be separated from our call, but our calling often can't be separated from our gifts.
Right.
And that doesn't mean, again, that God might ask you to do something that you're not gifted in, and he will strengthen you in that moment and give you abilities to do what he needs to in that moment. But primarily outside of that, all of a sudden that gift that we put on, that hat that we put on that we never had, disappears. However, our natural gifts that God has given us and given us an inclination to, Joseph, no matter what environment he was in, he excelled, whether it was in Potiphar's house or in the prison or in the palace. All of his giftings caused him to succeed, and excel far beyond everyone else. And so our giftings can often be separated. And that's an area in which we can also help develop. Yes, God has given us giftings, but it's also, if you think of the parable of the talents, it's like God gave us a talent, and you can take it as the other word of talent. Obviously, in the parable of the talents, it means
Right.
a certain measurement of gold. But if you look at it another way, God's given us gifts, as in talents and certain inclinations and abilities to do stuff. And we can invest in that. We can build that. And oftentimes it's in the wilderness, like Moses, or what you might say in seasons where you're wondering, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? And you're kind of praying, praying, praying. And I think oftentimes we can waste those seasons just praying and hoping and waiting instead of investing and growing and pouring into ourselves. I've mentioned the John Wooden quote of, when opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. And we need to take our seasons that feel like wilderness seasons and prepare in them, grow in them. Joseph had the opportunity when he was a slave and taken into Potiphar's house to be haphazard, to give half of what he could, or put in lazy work, but he didn't. He gave the best that he had. And in that, he grew to the top of Potiphar's house. When he got thrown in the prison, he could have moped and been like, look, not only was I sold into slavery and then thrown into Potiphar's house, I've served him faithfully, and now I'm in a prison. And he could have moped there, but he didn't. He continued to work diligently, and he rose to the top of the prison. And eventually he got called up to the palace, where he worked diligently and rose to the top of Egypt. And so, yeah, maybe not all of our giftings are going to take us to the top of the nation, but it can take us to the top of our calling for which God has laid before us. Because Joseph's calling was to be someone that could bring the people or the children of Israel to a place of refuge during a drought. And he even says that to his brothers, that God prepared this for them beforehand, not for destruction, but for their good, even though that they meant it for evil. So a couple points here of, we cannot divorce our gift from our calling, but our gift can be separated from our calling.
Yeah.
And so we can work in those gifts, and they may not make sense at certain times. Our callings, like Moses's calling, didn't make sense initially because he's going to have to talk to Pharaoh. He's like, I'm not good at public speaking. So it might not make sense at times, but once we get going in our calling and see where God is driving us, you'll see that your gifts are very well suited towards your calling. And God wouldn't have given you giftings if he didn't intend for you to use them.
Absolutely. I love what you said about Joseph, that wherever he was planted, his gift made room for him or became evident and promoted him. I've said the same thing. I'm primarily a communicator, and that's my gifting. I'm a preacher, a teacher of the Word of God, and that has taken on a lot of different forms in 40 plus years of ministry. But I'm also a church planner, and I've done that on several occasions. And I've often said, you can drop me in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and I'll get something going. Like I'll have scorpions coming to church or something. I'm going to find something to preach to. I'm going to get something assembled. And everywhere I've gone, Cameron, it's funny because I worked for 7 years, as you know, as a safety guy in the oil fields. But because I was a minister and had an authentic call on my life, before you knew it, I was doing weddings, I was doing funerals, I was praying for the sick. My boss one time said, hey, my mom's sick at home. Could you go by and lay hands on her? And I became like the chaplain of that business, in addition to being a safety guy, and then for a short time, even the general manager. And my gift made room for me. And because I also was gifted in like doing publications and things like that, I created a company newsletter. So whereas Joseph was an administrator, and that's what he did wherever he went, I was a communicator. And so I used my communication skills and my inherent calling to ministry. And even the job where I'm at now is very pastoral as a hospice chaplain. But because, again, I have this gift of communication since I've been there, I've been privileged to do Good Friday services over the last couple of years. The first time it's ever been done in their beautiful chapel that they have at their facility. And now we're going to be starting something on a more regular basis, not only for the patients, but for, whatever staff happen to want to come to this particular service that we're going to be doing. And it all stems out of just, your gift will make room for you. And I've seen a lot of people that talk about, well, I'm called to do such and such, and they sit around forever and nothing ever gets going. Well, I question whether that's their particular calling, or is that just maybe an ambition they have? Because if you're really called to something, and the hand of God is upon you to do that thing, doors will open for you. And I've found that, even there's times, like you said, where you're kind of in I hate to use the word stagnant season. I would rather use it a preparation season, because I think that's always what they are. Even when you're in a preparation season and your gift is not making room in the same way that it would be, for example, if you're in public ministry, I've had those behind the scenes seasons where I was still being used. My gift was still being employed. And like I said, even when times when I wasn't, and I don't know that I've ever for very long not been involved in a church in some way, like pastoring or preaching at one. But even when that wasn't the primary thing that I was doing or the primary source of my income, well, then I was doing it on media. I was doing it, online. I was writing. In other words, if you have a gift, it will evidence itself, and that is evidence of your calling. Whom God calls, He equips. So I think people try to make it way more mysterious, because I think sometimes what happens is we have a prototypical idea of what ministry is, and so when we feel called, we think we'll have to fit into this particular box. But what if Joseph had done that? What if Joseph said, well, I've got to be a public speaker, I've got to be a preacher because I feel the call in my life? He would have completely missed what God had authentically called him to do. So I think we have to just use a little bit of gray matter as well as spiritual discernment, just to recognize where do I excel? If you were to throw me in a group of people that need help, where would I find my contribution really helping, the overall vision or purpose of this group? And if you go into a church and maybe they need help with the nursery and you're like, I don't want to do, so you're willing to do it, you're willing to take your turn, but you recognize there's not any real grace or gift there. But then all of a sudden, maybe an opportunity comes to do something organizational and you find out, man, I've got organizational skills. It just comes easy to me. What is that? Well, you tapped into a gift. So your calling is somewhere along that line. But it might be somebody else that just, I don't know what it is, but I just love to prepare and communicate and preach the word of God. Well, that's where your calling lies. And the problem is, unfortunately, Cameron, because of certain paradigms that we have, cultural paradigms, I think, even in the church, we don't see it as being ministry unless you're heading up some kind of ministry or unless you're preaching behind a pulpit. And yet, as one who has been doing that all my life, I have noticed that many churches excel, not because the pastor's primary gifting is leading the charge. It may be, he may be kind of setting the vision and doing the preaching on Sunday, but it's what, like we say sometimes, it's the teamwork that makes the dream work, and that's very true. If you don't have a team that's utilizing their skills and gifts, then that one solo gift is not going to really have a platform from which to speak. And so, if everybody would recognize, that we're all called distinctly, and that if we would just fulfill the role or fill the role that God's gifted us to fill, then the question of calling to a great degree would be answered. Now, that's going to take on various forms, and there are times for sure that one season ends and you've got to figure out, okay, now how do I utilize my gifts now in a different context? But still, the calling stays similar because the gifting is similar. It may be in a little bit, the office title might be different, but there's going to be similar aspects to it because that's where your gift lies.
I think oftentimes we can be inhibited by our upbringing or inhibited by celebrity. And what I mean by that is, I'm one of the youngest of four. And growing up, when I was younger, each one of my older siblings were recognized for different gifts or abilities that they had. Krista, my oldest sister, was a wonderful writer and loved reading. My brother Christian was an artist, both like physical art, drawing, and singing, and in a band. And then my sister Chloe was someone who's very gifted with kids. You gave her a kid, and that child was all of a sudden content and happy, and just like any kid she like touched was just all of a sudden like at peace, and she had a natural inclination towards that. And so my upbringing, I felt often confused about what my giftings were, because as being the youngest, you often look up to your older siblings and you're compared to your older siblings. And when you don't live up to the same standards as them, you get picked on or made fun of. And so I often struggled with, who am I? What am I supposed to do? What is my gifting? And so I tried to imitate those around me. And then often to a certain degree was you're inhibited by the celebrity of famous people or those you look up to. So many people want to be like other celebrities, but they don't have any of the natural giftings that those celebrities do, whether that is in the aesthetic gifting they have in just their genes or their acting ability, singing ability, dancing ability. Those individuals have natural inclinations that you do not. And I'm not saying that these people don't work hard. Hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. And Ed Sheeran's a great example of, he was on a show and talks about how everyone comes up to him and says, "Oh, you're just so naturally talented." He's like, "No, no, I'm not." And he plays a video of him singing, and it's not great. But he worked hard. He worked
Yeah, he
very
did.
hard to get where he is.
Yeah.
But he also did have a natural gifting towards that work ethic, towards that mindset, towards everyone has their own inclination and giftings towards something. And oftentimes we can be inhibited by looking at our upbringing or our celebrity or our environment. If people are telling you that that kind of gifting is stupid or useless or never going to be worthwhile. Um, I know, for example, people that are raised in a secular environment, maybe their family's telling them it doesn't seem profitable or logical in the profit sense. And so it's not valuable. But profit isn't everything. In business, it's often this method is often like they use the phrase align your passion with your purpose and you'll find profit. And obviously, in all examples, we're not in business and everything, we're not trying to find profit, but we are trying to align our passion with our purpose because our passions are our giftings. We naturally enjoy and look forward to the things that we're good at. It's very rare that you find someone that looks forward to doing something that they're bad at unless they have a natural inclination to want to grow. It's just not in your nature to enjoy. I love, for example, playing video games with people. I don't play them often, but when I do, I normally win. It's very rare for me to lose at a video game, which I do enjoy when I lose because then it reminds me of, oh, hey, I can get better. But it's very rare that ever happens. I like playing video games because I have a natural inclination towards them and I normally win. Um, Now, I don't think I'm meant to find any sort of purpose at them, but I just have a natural inclination towards that. I have a natural inclination towards public speaking, and that I can align with a purpose that makes sense for me in what I feel God's calling me to in ministry. Often, times people are very confused at the fact that I can get up and just start talking and have nothing planned. And to me, it makes perfect sense. I know that I've learned things over the course of my life, and I trust that God, when I'm going to minister, is going to bring those things to the front of my mind to in my memory to be able to speak on and talk of. And if I'm getting ready to preach, I know that I can prepare for it because I know what I need to say and points I need to bring up, and I know how other people I've listened to have put together their preaching messages and the ones that I've enjoyed and ones I haven't enjoyed. And I don't want to copy certain things and I do want to. And so I'm able to take a passion, something that I already have a natural inclination towards, shape it and bring out my purpose to bring out a better result. I'm not going to use profit in this circumstance. Um, but I would say one of the ways in which you often can find what you're gifted in is by finding out who your mentors are. Now, I said that you're often inhibited by your upbringing and celebrity, but those that are like genuine mentors, not people that you're idolizing, but are genuine mentors in your life, we're often drawn towards the mentors we pick because they have a gifting that we have. They think the way we think, and oftentimes they're much further ahead than we are. Um, I've had a number of mentors over my life, and I'm not saying every single one of them is identical to me. I'm saying that they possessed characteristics or abilities that I saw value in and wanted to learn from. Why? Was it something I was really bad at? No, because if it was something I was unbelievably bad at and would never be good at, I wouldn't be interested in pursuing them. None of my mentors that I can think of, and they're probably one of them is gonna like contact me and be like, "What do you mean I'm not?" I don't think any of them are gifted dancers or have the ability to dance. Now, I could be wrong. One of them could message me, but I don't think any single one of them has a gifting to dance. I don't think any one of them, as far as I'm aware, has the ability to sing well. I can't dance. I can't sing well. What they can do is they all that I can think of have the ability to put together a message and bring out a message that is from God and help people grow. They have the ability to become intimate and connect one on one with people to bring out their best sides to help them grow. They all have very intentional ministries And so I enjoy that aspect. I enjoy the people that think the way I do. Now, obviously, you don't want to get stuck in an echo chamber, but oftentimes your mentors are there to accentuate and bring out that gifting and helping it flourish to its full potential.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said. You talked about Ed Sheeran, and when you talked about him, something just went off inside me that I think is also another impediment to calling. And I want to use Ed Sheeran as an example. Now, Ed Sheeran, most everybody probably knows who he is, but he's obviously a British, pop artist and so forth. One of the most successful in the history, one of the most downloaded, if not the most downloaded, artists ever. Um, his Divide tour, which took place several years back, what broke every record, for ticket sales and attendance and all this kind of thing. Very, very successful. But what I want to talk about is this idea of I'd rather ask forgiveness than ask permission. One of the things that impeded Ed in the early days of his endeavoring to become a name, if you will, was that there sometimes, both in ministry and in life, there are certain gatekeepers. In his case, it was the record companies, right? You got certain companies that they're the ones who produce albums. And so Ed started off, he left home at a very early age, I think 15, 16 years of age, and began busking on the streets of London. For those of you that don't know, that means you played on the street for money. And so he'd play on the street for money. And what he's doing, he's developing his craft. And he'd sleep on everybody's couch, friends of his and whatnot. And then he'd begin to do shows in local clubs. And sometimes he would be doing 1, 2, even 3 shows a night, be doing that all week long. He's building a name for himself all the time. He's also perfecting his craft. I've heard that audio that you talk about, and he stunk. Like he said, I was not natively a good singer. I worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. But what he had was a gift. He knew that what his destiny was. And so he continued to perfect his craft until he got very, very good. And then what happened was eventually, since the companies turned him down, like Columbia or whoever they were, I don't remember which ones he went to, but since they turned him down, he just self-produced his own. He's an amazing songwriter. So he wrote a song called The A-Team, which actually won Song of the Year. He beat out Adele and everybody else in the early stage of his career. So he started self-producing these things and selling them. I don't know if he sold them out of the rucksack, I think, that he had when he would perform. And pretty soon he got the attention of a record label who finally, went ahead and recorded him. He got a contract, and then the rest is history. But what I like is that he carved his own path to success. He didn't wait for someone to give him permission. And one of the things I see bad about our denominational system sometimes is that you can have a young man with a call on his life, but he has to go through certain hoops before he can ever have a platform to do what he's called to do. I'll never forget a friend of mine who was kind of a non-denominational minister, but he felt that he needed some kind of, credentialing, to have the clout to do what God had called to do. He felt called to the nation of Spain, and he spoke fluent Spanish, even though he's from San Bernardino. And so somehow he landed with the Foursquare denomination, and they said, "Yeah, we'll sponsor you over there but we got to prove your gift out first. So we want you to come and pastor a church for us." I think it was like in New Mexico. So anyway, he goes through their hoops, jumps through all their hoops, does exactly what they ask him to do. He's very successful. God bless him ministry. And then at the end of the day, they said, "Nah, we don't think we want to send you to Spain. We want to send you somewhere else." Well, the gifts and callings of God are not only irrevocable, they're non-negotiable. You can't just say, "Well, I'll trade this call for this call." So he ends up leaving them and hooking up with a different organization that understood something about calling. And so he was able to go where he was called to go. And I know in my own life, maybe my favorite story along this line is Lester Sumrall. Here's Lester Sumrall, a young man who, ended up becoming a missionary in 110 nations of the world. And, he was rebellious as a teenager, running from God, knew he had a call in his life, and he ends up getting tuberculosis. And back in those days, tuberculosis, or consumption as it was called, was a death sentence. It'd be like hearing you got AIDS and cancer or something like that. I mean, everybody died. So he's in South Florida, had plenty of sunshine, ocean air, doesn't know why he got it, but he did. And he heard the doctor tell his parents, "Hey, that's the death rattle in his voice. He'll be gone in a couple hours." And so here's the death certificate. As soon as he dies, let me know. I'll come along and sign it. That's how how close to death he was. And then in the nighttime, he has a vision. And on one side of his bed, he sees a coffin. On the other side, he sees a giant Bible that reaches from the floor to the ceiling. And the Lord tell him, "Take your pick. You're going to either do one of those tonight. Either you're going to die and go in that coffin," which he knew meant not just death, but eternity in hell for being a rebellious little, snotty-nosed teenager, "or you're going to take this Bible and preach the gospel around the world." And he said, "Can I make the decision tomorrow?" He said, no, there are no more tomorrows for you. And he said, Lord, if you'll let me live as long as I preach, I'll be the oldest living preacher one day. And so he made that commitment. He woke up the next day completely healed of tuberculosis. He had 2 plates full of, dinner or breakfast, the same thing that his daddy had, and he's from the deep South. So he had, chicken fried steak and eggs and biscuits and gravy or whatever. And, once he finished that plate, he ate another plate and strength just began to flow back into his body. And then the Spirit of the Lord spoke to him and said, what about that commitment you made to me? He said, well, I'm going to do it. So he and his friend took a model, I think it was a Model T, and began to go to the schoolhouses in the fields of the South and preach and do evangelistic crusades in these schoolhouses. He didn't go to the churches. He didn't go to the denominations. He didn't ask anybody's permission. He just went wherever there was an opportunity. And one by one, he began to raise up these churches and these old, schoolhouses. Finally, the denomination hears about it and say, hey, we want to come and license you. It's hilarious to hear him talk about it. What does that mean? Well, it means we're going to give you a piece of paper. Well, do I need that piece of paper? Oh, yeah, you should have this piece of paper. Okay, well, I guess so. And so they gave him a piece of paper. Then later on, after he's planted so many more churches, and he's just doing the work of the ministry with a call of God upon his life, they say, well, hey, we want to ordain you now. He said, what does that mean? So, well, we're going to give you another piece of paper. It's better than the last one. So it's hilarious to hear him talk about, this bureaucracy that, these guys feel is so important when actually he's already doing the work of the ministry because the hand of the Lord's upon him. And I see this as a real problem. Oftentimes we have this, I don't know, like I said, these gatekeepers that tell us what we can or can't do. I'm so thankful that I went to a Bible college that just acknowledged the call of God. Even the organization that I'm closely associated with today, and I guess I'm still the California representative for, they recognize, hey, if you're called, then you just need to obey your calling, and we're just here to support you. And they don't try to tell you how to do it or what hoops you need to jump through to become a part of the organization and have credentials. They recognize the call of God, and they just simply affirm what you're called to do. But I see a lot of young men, Cameron, that get in these denominational structures, and you got to go to their seminary, you got to go through their particular kind of program. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with accountability. But at the same time, I think sometimes these hoops are really more about control than they are about really facilitating the call of God on someone's life. So I think it's important. Jesus said, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. He didn't say anything about denominations. If anybody's listened to this very long, I'm not a fan of denominations, nor am I a big fan of boards. Boards are what you spank little boys with. And if you have a call of God in your life, you need to obey God and not worry about, what the boards are saying. But nevertheless, I think it's important that people, have authentic connections in the local church. I believe the people that ought to ordain a person is their pastor, the one who knows them, the one that's, raised them up, the one who's given them opportunity, because he has the most direct understanding and knowledge of what that young man, has, what he's going through, what he's experienced. And then he can have that personal kind of one-on-one connection with him. And I think that's the kind of accountability we need today, not just these organizational structures. I'm not a big fan of that. But nevertheless, my point is that people need to pursue the call of God, irrespective of what other people say about it. You think about all these people that you mentioned, Moses, Joseph, if they were to go ask permission, I'm glad Joseph didn't go ask his brothers or his father for permission to pursue the call of God in his life, because they all tried to talk him out of it. When he had those visions and dreams that showed that he was going to be a ruler one day, even his father kind of got on his case about it. So sometimes we just have to be knowledgeable, perceptive of what God's calling us to do. I had a lot of people try to talk me out of aspects of my calling, and I would smile and thank them very much and then just go do what God told me to do. I didn't argue with them. There was no point in arguing with them because they were convinced I knew they were wrong. I just had to go obey God. And God is so faithful. If he's authentically called you to do it, he'll open the doors, he'll finance the way, he'll do it all, but you got to know what you're called to do and be faithful to that.
Yeah, I think what you're ending on there is incredibly important to take to heart, that God validates our calling, not people. Don't get me wrong, people can come up and compliment you and state, like, for example, if you preach the message, people can come up and tell you how it affected them, how it impacted them. And that's great that God used you in that way and they get to offer a little validation. However, you might have someday one person come up to you and say, man, that preaching was just off the wall. I don't know why you ever preach. I don't think you should be a minister. Are you all of a sudden going to throw everything out because of that? No. People can say whatever they want. However, God's the one that has chosen your calling, and it can't be revoked. It can't be removed. And don't get me wrong, people are incredibly important. And partnering with our callings. For example, in Timothy's ministry, you see when Paul's writing to him, he tells him to use the gifts that which he received by the laying on of hands by the elders and by him. And so Paul is literally saying that when we laid hands on you and partnered with you in this ministry and we prayed over you, there is spiritual gifts that were imparted to you for the work of ministry. And so people are incredibly important. Like you mentioned, if you're going into ministry and you're going to be a part of a church, yeah, it's probably good to get ordained. That way, if
Yeah,
you're, especially if you're in a ministry and you're raising up with a ministry, people want to know, hey, yeah, the head of the church approves of this person.
right.
Now, if you're going out and starting your own ministry and whatnot, it's not really going to matter. But if you're going on behalf of a denomination name or a church name, and we've talked about denominations and different church bodies, boards, etc., and we have different opinions on them. And we're not saying that they're all good or they're all bad or anything like that. We just have preferences. And so if you're going on out on behalf of a denomination and you like that denomination, great. But you'll probably want to have their ordination and their seal
Right.
of approval because it's
Yeah,
saying, hey, I
absolutely.
have sat under this person or sat under this ministry, and they have found that I possess a certain level of competency and ability that is recognized. And it's that the gifts I have been evident and my calling has been made clear to them.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we can get into different ministries because we're eager to serve and we think we know our gifting and we really don't. And we find out in that time of work pretty much, oh, hey, you know what? I think my gifting's a little different than I thought. You know what? I had an idea for it. And we talked about bringing this up in a future episode, maybe, or a future podcast episode, talking about vision, mission, values, etc. Because oftentimes we have a vision and we think we know how to accomplish it. And we really don't have the mind of God about it. We just like, well, I have a vision of where I want to be and I'm going to take my mission and get there. And it's like, yeah, your mission's probably wrong. Or sometimes you have a great mission statement, but you have the wrong vision for where you're going to end. So oftentimes in the work, in those denominations, in the different things that we're doing, we have the ability to really suss out where we're supposed to be going. Where is God calling us to? What are our gifts and everything? So it's important that we don't let God or we don't let people
Yeah.
invalidate something that God has validated.
Yeah, I need to qualify that too, because I'm not against like I said, the accountability and the oversight of senior ministers, nor am I against being validated in your calling by an authoritative body. I believe we all need to be under authority as well as, pursuing our calling. But I think the difference is there's a difference between having a bureaucratic structure that's inhibiting the call of God rather than a group of men that are acknowledging the call of God and then providing a framework whereby your calling can have the best opportunity to flourish because you're accountable to them. So that's very important. I think a good model of that is in Acts 13, verses 1 and 2, where it talks about, the five prophets and teachers at Antioch, gives a list of five men, beginning with Barnabas and ending with Saul. The Bible said, as they ministered to the Lord and fasted. So this kind of a corporate group of people, the Holy Spirit said to the church, separate unto me Barnabas and Saul for the work whereunto I have called them. So God was the one who called them. What he was telling the leaders to do is acknowledge this now and separate them to that calling. So it's God who calls, it's we who are aware of that calling, and then it's the church that acknowledges and sanctions, if you will, publicly gives credibility to that calling by saying, yes, we agree that there's an authentic calling upon this individual. They've been submissive, they've been, they've proven themselves in lesser forms of service, and now it's time for them to, mature and separate themselves under this calling. And that's always ideal. I think, if somebody were to ask me, I think it's always ideal if you can to be under a senior minister first and then separate unto your own calling. I didn't really have that opportunity after Bible college. I did as a younger man. But after Bible college, within 3 months, I was pastoring my first church in my early 20s. I don't think that's ideal. It just happened to be the course in which God set me. But I'd had a young life full of, being under accountability and being in the church and serving in a local fellowship. So I think that's, wonderful if somebody has a call and they can sit under a senior minister, be on staff, kind of learn the ropes to ministry, learn on somebody else's time and dime, and then, go out and do your own after you've gotten established incredible ministry. And this also speaks to something else we talked about, I think one time, Cameron. I started off pioneering churches at a relatively young age and without any denominational support. So like the first church that I pastored, I kind of did and didn't pioneer. Billy Rash from Current Christian Center in Bakersfield started the church up in Bishop, but it was only like around 9 people when I took it over. So you could say I was the pioneering pastor, but I wasn't the pioneer of the church. But we went from, 9 to 30 within a few months, then 60 by the next year. And that thing went up to about 180 people in the 6 years that I was there. And so I was kind of the pioneering pastor, if you will. And then I went other places like Vermont and pioneered a church, which, you were involved with that one, of course. And then since then, I've done a couple of other local works, and in those, it would have been wonderful if I had had the support of a larger church. Now, what's really wonderful is you have churches. I think of, like, for example, Holy Trinity Brompton, a spirit-filled Anglican church in London, pastored by Nicky Gumbel, wonderful man of God who started the Alpha program. And what they've begun to do, I think, is brilliant. They're buying up these old Anglican churches that are dead, now being turned into, lawyer offices and things like that. They're buying those churches up, and then they're taking a man of God, he and his wife, like a young couple, and they're sending them out and letting them start new churches in these existing buildings and giving them a worship team and giving them a children's team, and then, encouraging, hey, we want a handful of you to go and get them rolling, get them started. How wonderful is that, man? I mean, I would have died and thought I'd gone to heaven if I'd had something like that, when I was pioneering my churches. We just went. And whether we had the gifts or not, we had to do media worship most of the time because we didn't, I can keep tune, but I'm not a worship leader. And so we just had to make do with what we had. But I certainly think it's ideal if you can kick off your church plant with that kind of support behind you. So there's certainly a valid place for, again, seniority and a credibility and proving yourself under a proven ministry. But I just think it needs to be in an organic kind of church relationship context and not just some kind of bureaucratic thing that's making you jump through a lot of unnecessary hoops just because it's their, I don't know, their system. I just have my issues with denominations. And it's not because I've had bad experiences personally with them so much. I just don't necessarily see any of it as biblical. I think God created local churches. And the organization I'm ordained with is not a denomination. It's just an affiliation of ministers who recognize, the call of God upon your life, and they'll give you credentials. They have the ability to credential you. I've ordained people. So I certainly believe in the process, but I just think it's important that when you have a call, you appreciate and value that call. Jesus calls. No one else can call anybody, only Jesus. What we do is acknowledge the call, recognize the call. And I will say this, no matter how much you say you're called, if nobody recognizes it, there's a good chance you're not. Because again, if you truly have a gift, it will make room for you. And I've been a big fan of guys who just go do it. I don't want to hear a lot of theorizing and guys who just, well, one day, if you're called, the door will open, God will make a way. He'll create the right connections, he'll finance it. And I've seen that to be true again and again and again.
And I think we often look at the secular world, and I think great spiritual principles translate very well to the natural world. And we look at entrepreneurs and very successful businessmen, and they often talk about, and if you watch any of them on YouTube, they would say, if I were starting over today, I, as a young person, would try and find the biggest organization, most successful person, and try and get their attention and ask if I could work for them for free or pay them to work for them. Now, that sounds weird, but oftentimes the reason why is because what you gain from that is far more valuable than anything else. Even if you're working a job that's paying, starting out in life, 50, 60, $70,000 a year, what you can learn from those people is more valuable. So oftentimes, if you have the ability to sit under someone that has your gifting, but has decades more behind them, and not only decades behind them, because there's a lot of people that have decades behind them that never utilize their gift well, that utilize their gift well, and it led to success. Whether that is something that you're being called to business and God's wanting you to become a business person, or maybe it's ministry, or maybe it's something else. If they have decades more than you do, and they've demonstrated great capability, great success, a great track record of integrity and everything behind them. See if you can sit under them, and you'll know if it's not where you're supposed to be. We've talked a lot about how to utilize your calling and to be confident in it, but you're going to know if you're in the wrong place real quick, because if you're grading against your calling, everything you do feels like you're just trying to walk through clay
Yeah.
and there's just nothing. And I was talking to my dad earlier today about different things that we do outside of ministry, and how oftentimes when you don't have ministry going, when you don't have the anointing on you, it just doesn't feel great. And I try to explain to people, like, the best feeling to me in the world is when I get up to preach, because no matter how insecure, how nervous, how anxious, whatever I am, as soon as my mouth opens, it's gone. And there's breath in my lungs, and I just know I'm doing what I was created to do. And there's no better feeling in the world. And it's hard to describe if you've that a person's never found what they were made to do. We are all made to do something. God made us for a purpose. He made us for a purpose, on purpose, and he gave us giftings and to be able to accomplish that. And if you're in an environment, if you're in an endeavor and you're not understanding why you're so miserable, or why there's no peace in it, or why it's so difficult, you're probably either using the wrong gift or you're in the wrong calling. Because my dad's mentioned it probably on this podcast before, when uh, we were supposed to go to Vermont, everything he did just was great. He didn't care if he was stuffing envelopes and licking stamps and licking the envelopes and mailing them out. He loved it. He loved every part of it. When it was time for him to design a website, he loved it. When it was time to edit a video, he loved it, because he was doing what God called him to, and God gifted and graced him in that time to be able to do so. And there was joy in it. And I'm not going to say that there's not times in our lives when we're doing the calling of God and using our gifts that it's not going to be hard work. It's going to be hard work. There's challenge, but there's a peace about it. And so if you're in the wrong area, you're going to realize, hey, I don't have peace. And I think oftentimes, and we've mentioned on this podcast, people use peace as an excuse or
Yeah.
a scapegoat for things that they don't want to do. They're like, you know what? I just don't have peace about it. It's like, well, get a job anyway. Like, I don't care if
Yeah.
you don't have peace. You
Right.
need a job to survive. You don't work, you don't eat. That's just biblical.
That's right.
And the peace of God is never going to contradict scripture. So it's just your own flesh. So get over it. Um, but the reality is, there is a very real peace that comes with doing the will of God and using the gifts in which he's called you to use.
Yeah, I've felt stirred up in some ways myself recently. I was telling my wife today that just some things that have kind of been dormant for a while, as far as certain ministry endeavors are concerned. It feels like some of those juices are being stirred up again. The Bible tells about stir up the gift of God within you. There have been times, I'll be honest, Cameron, where I was reluctant to even listen to certain preachers or read certain books for fear that that would get so stirred up with me that I'd be dissatisfied with where I was now, wanting because I'd want to go plant something again because I know what's inside me. It's so funny. My wife will tell anybody if I'm like, I remember one time I was on my way to do a funeral somewhere, and I was driving through a town not that far away from here, but I'd never driven through it before. And I called her up on the phone on my way to do this graveside funeral. I said, boy, this town is such a pretty little town. She said, no, they don't need a church there, because she knows how I'm wired. And sure enough, one time she took me to Paso Robles to go to one of her son's track meets, and we ended up pioneering a church there. That's how I'm wired. I'm wired that way. So sometimes you almost don't want to get your, so my wife's laughing at me. She's coming through. She's snipping those wires, she said. But you just got to know how you're wired, what your calling is. And so sometimes I don't even like to listen to certain things that might stir me up, because there's maybe no avenue at that moment for it to have expression, because God's got you doing something else. But I've found this to be true, that, God called me particularly to the healing ministry years and years ago. And I remember Oral Roberts saying this, that he weaved in and out of that ministry, that sometimes it was a primary emphasis, other times it was not. At one time you raised up a Bible, I mean, a college, right? ORU. So sometimes God will emphasize certain aspects of your calling. I remember for a while, I was in my 50s, I was writing like nonstop. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of essays. I think 250, 300 essays. I forget exactly how many. I counted them up once. Ton of essays. And I ended up making, they were newspaper articles, magazine articles, and I ended up making devotional books out of them because I wanted them to have a little bit longer shelf life than just a flash in the pan, that they would appear, in a weekly newspaper or something. And then today I don't write at all, hardly. I mean, if I sit down to write, and it's not because I don't want to, well, really I don't, because there's no grace on it right now, but it's just that season is kind of over for now. I'm sure I will write again. But again, during that time, I wrote so much that I kind of developed that craft quite well. There's a gift obviously to it, but there's a craft side to it as well. It's just like somebody who's gifted in athletics, they can be a great natural basketball player, but they still got to practice. They got to still put in the reps. Steph Curry's a great 3-point shooter, but that didn't come with, he had a skill, a talent, but it still came with thousands upon thousands of hours of practice. And so the same thing is true in ministry. Is you may be gifted, but you still have to hone that craft. And that's particularly true if there's a natural talent involved, like music or something like that. But preaching is the same way. I teach on, communicating the word of God. I teach a class on that at Bible college. And a lot of it is just, again, having time behind the pulpit, and sometimes you just got to have the opportunity to do it. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, Cameron, I just want to quickly mention as we're kind of, maybe in the second half or winding down or whatever, is you mentioned mentors earlier. One of the things I think is so important is, the Bible says deep calls unto deep, and there'll be times where you'll be hearing somebody talk or speak, and what they're saying, it's just like a tuning fork. If you get two tuning forks that are resonating at the same pitch, you'll get this amazing effect where either in harmony or they're in unison doing the exact same vibrations. There's no oscillation, there's no wavering in the tone. It's just they just correspond to each other, you know what I mean? And likewise, sometimes you'll hear somebody talking about something, maybe it's missions, or maybe it's children's ministry, or maybe it's just they're talking about teaching the word of God, and what they're talking about excites you so much, and you think, man, what is this? Well, what's happening is that they're stirring up what's in you because you have a similar gift. I remember my friend Larry Carroll, who smuggled Bibles in Eastern Europe for years and years, was over in San Luis Obispo attending Cal Poly, and he heard that somebody from Open Doors, Brother Andrew's ministry, where they smuggled Bibles overseas, was going to be there, and he thought, well, I want to go here. That'd be kind of interesting. Well, while the guy from that ministry is talking, he got so stirred up. And then he found out that they were going to have a sign-up sheet afterward. He thought, man, I got to get back there before everybody signs up ahead of me. He said, then I looked around the room and I noticed people were counting ceiling tiles and looking at their watch, and not everybody was stirred up the way he was, but it resonated with him. And I found, Cameron, that if I keep my spiritual ears open, God will point me toward my mentors that are going to help to shape me, because I'll have that same resonance. That deep will call into deep. Brother Hagin was my doctrinal spiritual father, but Lester Sumrall was my pioneer spiritual father. And I read his book, The Life Story of Lester Sumrall, more than I have any other book outside the Bible. I read it at least 10 times, a dozen times, I don't know. Because every time I would read it and he'd talk about pioneering another church in those schoolhouses, or, going to another nation, it would stir something up in me. And I remember I can't travel anywhere without wanting, do they need a church here? If I see an ocean, I think, what's on the other side of that ocean? Do they need a church there? It's just in me. And whenever I would hear him talk about that, that would resonate with me. So one of the ways you can help to identify that calling is look for those voices that speak to you. And if something doesn't stir you up or excite you, it doesn't mean it's not important. It means it's just not important to you. It's not maybe a part of your calling, but maybe the person sitting next to you is doing handsprings on the inside because they're stirred up by it. But we're all different members of the body of Christ. We all have different functions. So not everything's going to resonate with you. Most of us are going to do one thing well and maybe have some ancillary giftings as well. But there's going to be a primary focus to your call. Like I said, for me, church planning, communicating, I know those are my areas. And even though I'm not pioneering anything now, even when we stopped pioneering physical churches, Cameron, we started pioneering, cyberspace and the internet and, online ministry. So it was still a form of, breaking through walls and pioneering and establishing things. So people just need to listen to that internal voice, which will oftentimes point them in the direction of their calling.
I stopped trying a long time ago to figure out how everything I was going to do was going to wrap back into my calling or apply to it. I think oftentimes, like you mentioned, we find ourselves in seasons that may not seem to fit in with our calling, but God has us there nonetheless.
Yeah.
And for me, from a very young age, I've known my calling, and I know my calling was in ministry, and I know very specifically where it's supposed to go. Now, if I were to start getting into that, people would be like, well, what you've done doesn't make sense. You've done like Bible studies in colleges, you've been like a youth pastor, you've been like on staff, on pastoral staff, you've done like sound, you've done media, you've done XYZ. How does any of that apply? And then, but it doesn't matter to me. I've never, a while ago, I decided to stop stressing because it may not make sense to us how it's going to wrap back into our calling,
Right.
but God does. God sees it. God knows. And just like, let's say we'll take it to the secular world again. Let's say you want to produce a great product and put it in the hands of every American. That's your vision. That's your dream, is to create a great product that's in the hands of every American. Well, your passion might be in product development to make that great product. However, to get it into the hands of every American, to make a great company, you're going to have to not only do product development, you're going to have to do marketing. You're going to have to do sales and bookkeeping, vendor management, real estate planning, all these different things. And you're like, no, why would I need real estate planning? Well, if you're going to need warehouses, you're going to have to build facilities to have places where your product can be stored, where it can be manufactured. You're going to have to go to different manufacturers and find out different technology. It's not just about developing that product, but then developing the people in your company, because your people are going to be your greatest asset of how you succeed. Your leadership skills are going to matter. You might want to say like, hey, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to have to deal with people. Doesn't matter. You're in this life. You're going to have to deal with people. If you want to be successful in any way, shape, form, or fashion in life, you're going to need to become a great leader and be able to influence people.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I just wanted to make a great product and get it in the hands of every American. Well, there's going to be a lot of steps to get there. And
Yeah.
while you may think that, well, God has me in the wrong place, I know what my calling is. So does He. He knows a lot better than you do.
Yeah.
I
He does.
guarantee it. And unless you're praying and God is saying, yeah, you've stepped out of the will of like that I have for your life, go and do this, you're probably in the correct area. God hasn't forgotten how to get your attention. He's not going to be like, oh crap, I forgot to let them know. No, God knows where you are. He knows what you're doing and He knows what He's preparing you for. And like I said, in that season, you just need to keep preparing and keep preparing, because you may want to do product development, but you might need to focus on sales. I might have a dream for ministry, and right now I'm in a secular job day to day. It doesn't mean that I'm in the wrong area. I've learned so much about leadership, about business functioning in the job I'm in, and I look on that gladly. And the person I sit under and my boss is a wonderful boss that I learned a lot about leadership and how to approach people and how to deal with different situations. And that's great. And the pastors I sit under that the church I volunteer at, they're wonderful pastors, and they're the most pastoral pastors I've probably ever been under,
Yeah.
that just love people well. And I'm grateful to sit under that. Does that mean that's where God's ending my life or where I'm just supposed to stay forever? No. Am I going to freak out about it? No. Because if Moses had to sit on the backside of the wilderness for 40 years, maybe I do too. And that's fine, because it's not about me at the end of the day. It's about God, His kingdom, His glory, and what we bring to that. And some people might be like, well, I just want to make sure I matter. And the reality is, and we've said it before on this podcast, that if you looked at the whole scheme of God as a great play, a great part of a musical, a drama, a comedy, whatever you want to make it, God's given us our own part. He wants us to be a part of the show. And sometimes people are like, well, my role just isn't that important. I was in a musical in high school, and I essentially had one line, but it was the longest piece of dialogue of anyone else in the play nonstop. And if I didn't deliver that dialogue, the entirety of that show would not come together. And it doesn't make sense, because sometimes it's like you're a small supporting role. Yeah, but that small supporting role matters. Do you not think that the supports of a house matter? Yeah, they might be inside the house and unseen and not be flashy, but that support matters. It's the structural integrity that matters. Sometimes our roles aren't flashy. Sometimes they aren't as cool or what we expected them to look like, but they have purpose, they have meaning. And oftentimes it may not be the role we want to be in. Maybe you wanted to be the worship leader, or maybe you wanted to be the head pastor. Maybe you wanted to be a great musician or artist or actor or whatever, and you're just not there. One, maybe it's not the end of the story, or two, maybe that's not what God had for you all along, and He has something even better planned. It may not be what you thought was better, but it's what He knows is better.
Yeah, David would have never killed Goliath had he not killed the lion and the bear. We mentioned Joseph, he would have never been fit to rule Egypt had he first not ruled in the prison and in Potiphar's home. And likewise with Moses, full of ambition at 40 years of age and ends up slaying an Egyptian, becoming a fugitive on the backside of nowhere until the humility is worked into him being a small shepherd of his father-in-law's sheep, wasn't even his own sheep. And then God worked into him the requisite humility he needed to lead the nation and shepherd them, which is really what he did. So every season you are in is preparation for something else. And I look back at my life, and every single season I have been in was necessary to prepare me for the next season. And so, for example, for years, I pastored and taught off notes, and I would write my notes out in manuscript form, still do sometimes, not always, but sometimes. But then I went into a ministry that was completely extemporaneous, and we would just flow by the Spirit of God. And now both of those are important to me for the kind of ministry I do today. Sometimes I don't even know I'm going to preach till the morning I'm going to preach. But I'm feeding on the Word of God. I have a long, history of filling myself, so I have a reservoir of knowledge to draw from. But had I not had experience in both those preaching styles, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm called upon to do today. And so much of what I've done in days gone by prepared me, equipped me, helped me. So now, what's wonderful, Cameron, when I sit in front of a bunch of young, potential ministers at like communicating the Word of God, or when I teach apologetics, I'm not just teaching the content of the class. I'm pouring into them 40 years worth of experience from different seasons where I was killing the lion and the bear, or serving in a smaller role somewhere that ultimately prepared me for something bigger and better. And it's a life journey, as you said. I think sometimes we have this really kind of arrogant, it's all about me, it's about my ambition, it's about my calling. And it's not. Jesus, there's only one star of this show, and that's Jesus. We all have a line or two in this play, if you will. Jesus is the star. We're all a supporting cast. So it really comes down to knowing our part and playing it well. And there's going to come times where you can find in the scriptures where there were men who served as a prophet for a moment. They were sent on a mission, and that was it. There are people that were sent as an apostle, if you want to use that term. They were a messenger from one church to another. That was the only time they served in that capacity. So John the Baptist, greatest prophet who ever lived, according to Jesus, and yet he served maybe 9 months to a year in that capacity. So sometimes we have these ideas that are really more man-made or built off our ambition than they are off of really what is the purpose of God for our lives. But for one thing for sure, if we're fulfilling the purpose of God for our life, there's a rich satisfaction in it. It's fulfilling. It scratches that itch, if you will, for service. We'll be serving in our sweet spot. There's nothing like experiencing the hand of God upon your life, the anointing of God upon your life. When I'm like you, when I'm in front of a group of people and I'm communicating and it's flowing out of my spirit, and I'm saying things that are almost beyond what I know because God's hand is just upon it. And then, I've had moments like that where I'm under the anointing, preaching the Word of God with great effect, and then suddenly here comes a word of knowledge or a word of wisdom. And now you're ministering personally to people, and there's nothing more beautiful than watching those moments happen. But those moments are the result of a cumulative preparation that has gone on for years and years before that. And so, everybody wants the end result, but we have to appreciate the process that it takes to get there. And sometimes those seasons, like you said, that feel like a down season or a back of the desert season, Moses shepherding his sheep until the burning bush comes, right? But the fact of the matter is, God has something for each and every one of us that will be fulfilling, that will not only contribute, but be consequential to the purpose of God being fulfilled in whatever venue or area that He's called you to. So we need to be faithful. We need to be consistent. We need to find the right people to pour into us, and then just wait for that opportunity. And when I say wait, I don't mean just wait like, drum your thumbs on the table. Put your hand to whatever you can. Be faithful in your local church. Just be industrious. Serve God wherever you can. And if you're busy, like somebody says, if you want something done, find a busy person. The fact of the matter is, God wants to use people that are willing to work. And a lot of times we hear this statement, work, ministry is spelled WORK, and it is. It's a lot of work. I've worked for companies. I work for one right now. I never worked harder than when I was in the ministry because I was driven by a call that was on my life that I wanted to fulfill. And likewise, all of us have something we're called of God to do. And we may be doing that as a full-time plumber, doctor, housewife, whatever. But there are gifts God's given each and every one of us. And one day we'll stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account for what we've done with what we've been given, the grace, the talents, the gifts. And we certainly want to be able to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant.
And if I could give at least one more piece of advice, it'd be don't focus on the destination, focus on the journey.
Yeah.
You know, my wife, if she can hear me talking about this point, is going to laugh because we talk about this all the time. I'm a very impatient driver on the road. And every time we're on our way to church, there's a community of retirement homes, a large, very, very large retirement community in the town our church is in. And they tend to drive slower. And I just find it funny because I make a joke often. I'm like, why do they drive so slow? They have less time. You think they'd be driving quicker. And I'm such a time obsessive person. I like to be on time. I like to be early. If I'm on time, I feel like I'm running so late.
Yeah.
And it stresses me out. And so many times my wife tells me, like, why not just enjoy this time? You're with me, you're with our daughter. And I'm like, but we got to be there. We got to be there on time. And I
Yeah.
told her, I'm like, watch, it'll just be funny when I'm older. I'm going to be that person that's like, man, why is everyone in a rush? Just enjoy the journey. And she's like, you are going to be that person. But the reality is, in life, we need to not focus on the destination. We need to focus on the journey. Because
Yeah.
the reality is, let's say every single one of you that's watching this or hears this, tomorrow you wake up and you reach your goal, you reach your destination. What are you doing the rest of your life?
Exactly.
What are you going to do? And I get it. I get it that it's frustrating to not be where you want to be, or at least not being on the part of the journey you wanted to be on, or maybe the journey doesn't look how you hoped it would. And like I said, you can use me as an example. I'm someone that wants to be in full-time ministry. Right now, from my physical location, from my understanding of my environment, I'm very far from that. However, I know that Joseph was in a prison one day, and in the very next, he was in the palace. It didn't happen overnight, but from his perspective, one night to the next was radically different. So focus on what is going well. So for me, for example, I can focus on the positive. I might not be in full-time ministry, but I get to do this podcast. I get to do ministry time and offering at my church. I get to share the gospel with people around me, and every single one of those are practices in extemporaneous ministry. My dad and I don't prepare for this apart from what we do throughout our weeks to continue to grow and learn. And we just come on here and we start ministering and we let it go out of the abundance of our heart and where we feel the Spirit of God is leading. When I do ministry time and offering at the church, part of it that our pastors encourage is don't prepare something, let God lead and guide you. And so, and even pre-service prayer, we do that too. And so it's opportunities for me to listen to God and let him just flow out of me. And for someone my age to get minimum, I would say 2 times a week practice at doing extemporaneous, man, that is just a hard word today, to do extemporaneous ministry is fantastic. I mean, we're coming up on 100 episodes, and I know that during COVID, my pastor's wife and I, Pastor Cindy, we used to do Wednesday nights where we would just do everything extemporaneous, and we would never prepare anything. We'd have a subject we wanted to hit, and we'd just minister on that for 30, 40 minutes. And so I have now had the opportunity to do extemporaneous ministry hundreds of times, if not 1,000 by now. And that
Yeah.
sounds like, well, now you're just stretching it. No, I'm really not, because of all the opportunities I've been given. And by when I visit people like that I've known and they know I'm in ministry, they're like, hey, why don't you share a little bit? Or I get up and do something like, hey, why don't you share out of your heart for a little bit? I've had so many opportunities. And for someone at my age, and I'm 28, I had to think about it. I'm 28 years old, and I've had almost, if not 1,000 opportunities That's fantastic
Yeah.
for me to be able to say that I've had 1,000 speaking opportunities where most people my age are still hoping to have their first. So I could focus on the negative of like, I'm not exactly where I hoped I would be, but I'm doing great. I have a lot of opportunity and God's doing great things and he
Yeah.
sees me and he knows me. And if he sees the birds of the air and he sees and he knows the cattle on the hill and he knows everything and he watches the lilies of the field, yeah, he's going to watch after me. And I don't need to worry about that I'm not where I want to be. Does that mean that there aren't moments of weakness where I freak out or get frustrated? Of course there are. But the thing that we can do is not focus on the destination, focus on the journey, and just stop and have an attitude of gratitude. Just be thankful and rejoice where we are. My pastor says all the time, we have every reason to rejoice. And it's so, so true. We have every reason to rejoice in Christ.
Yeah.
And like I said, I have so many things for which I can be grateful and just endlessly thankful for God that He's done in my life, the giftings He's given me, the opportunities He's given me, the experiences I've had that some people would kill to have that I've just been blessed to be able to. So just stop, focus on the journey, quit thinking about getting to the end. God will bring you there. If God's set out a path, a journey for you, He's put a dream in your heart, a vision in your mind. Do you not think that He's able to perform it? Do you not think He's able to get you there? The whole Bible is just replete with plethora of examples of people that God gave dreams and visions to, and they made it to them. And oftentimes, yeah, there are people occasionally that don't get there because they choose not to get there. But
Yeah.
God, it's not a lack of God bringing them there.
Yeah, my last thing I would say is just always be led, not driven. You can be driven by ambition. If you have an unhealthy sense of pressure to get in the ministry now, get in the ministry now, that's probably not an altruistic, I just want to bless people kind of motive. It's probably more about you finding a platform. So I think it's really important that we let God, you know, open the doors and be led into opportunities, not try to make something happen. You are not going to rush God's process. You're not going to manipulate him or talk him into anything more quickly than what he's ready to put you in. So just enjoy the journey. I got opportunities to preach at a very young age. I started preaching at 17, was in full-time ministry at 22, 23, 20, 22, 23 years of age, and have never really quit preaching. I've preached thousands upon thousands of messages. But no matter what season I'm in, I always had that kind of like, what's next? And it's like a young person, man, I can hardly wait till like 16 that I can drive. Now I can hardly wait till I'm 18 and I'm considered adult. I can hardly wait till I'm 21 so I can do this. I can hardly wait till and then we just waste life waiting for the next thing. So as you said, enjoy the journey, enjoy where you're at now, be fruitful wherever you can be. Say yes to the opportunities that come your way that you feel God is opening, especially if you're young and you don't have a lot of opportunities. Just say yes to all of them. But when you'll get to a point in life where there's more opportunities than there is time, and you have to be more discriminating and learn how to say no. But early on, if somebody asked me to preach, I didn't have to pray about it. The answer was yes. And I preached to two people before. I preached to the fellow that opened the door, the guy that came with me, and preached the same way I would have. Might as well have been a crowd of people, and I'm happy to do it today. I teach apologetics at the Bible College, Cameron. One of my former students said, "Hey, would you come to our house and share with a handful of young college kids who are about to go off to college and just do kind of an apologetic presentation to them so they're kind of prepared for what they're going to be facing?" I said, absolutely. And to me, that was not a small crowd. I have no idea who those young people are, but they could be the movers and shakers of tomorrow. And so for that hour, 2 hours, whatever I shared with them, it was such a blessing. And they were so appreciative and so hungry. So I consider that a huge crowd. I preached to, maybe 50 to 100 Bible school students in Bangalore, India. That may have been the biggest crowd I ever preached to. And yet I preached to technically thousands of people. I've preached to millions of people online. But that little group full of hungry people that were out there planting 50 churches at a time might have been the biggest crowd I ever preached to. So we got to get this idea of ambition out of our head. I'll never forget this. I'll close this story on my little part. I had pastored for 6 years, built up a church to about 180 with the help of, those in the church with me. And then I left that church and went into the itinerant ministry. And the first place I preached was one of the places I'd preached before I entered the ministry full time. So I'm back at this little bitty church, maybe 20 people on a good night, right? In a community not too far from where I live now. And I'm looking out at this group, a handful of snaggletooth ladies and a few old guys, you know, the older congregation, right? I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Lord, I've been demoted because I just came out of a church, you know, it was 180 people, pretty thriving church, you know, certainly a mover and shaker kind of church in our little community. And I said, Lord, I've been demoted. And I kind of felt like I deserved to be demoted at that moment. You know, I just, Lord, I've been demoted. And he said, no, I promoted you. I mean, I heard the voice of the Lord is so clear. I said, Lord, have you counted the room? And he said, up until now, one small town was your pulpit. He said, I'm going to open the nation to you. And he did. I preached all over this country. And then, in fact, he opened the doors and I went over to Austria. I've been to India twice. And then through, of course, the internet, preached around the world. So don't despise the day of small things. It's different than what it looks like. Let me just assure you, it's different than what it looks like. You're laying the groundwork. You're establishing faithfulness. You're doing things that are necessary for you to get to the next step. So just be consistent, be faithful, pray, and let God open the doors. Like Paul Yonggi Cho used to say, I pray and I obey. And that's pretty good advice for anybody.
I think that's a great place to end because it's, yeah, true. Like nothing greater we can say than if you're in any question, just pray and obey.
Yeah, amen. Go ahead and lead us in prayer.
Lord, we thank you that you are an amazing God, that you have gifted us and have a calling on our life, and that you said, no matter what, they are without repentance and they are irrevocable. We thank you that you are helping us grow in our gifting and that you are providing clarity to see what the calling is on our life, and that you give us the boldness and the wisdom to step up and to fulfill those, and that we don't get weary in well doing, but we are strengthened in faith and we are able to give glory to you in everything that we do, and that we don't work half-heartedly, but we work willingly at whatever we're doing as though we are doing it for you, where we see where it is taking us and we know that you are going to bless it. And whether we are in a pit or a prison or in Potiphar's or finally in the palace, that in every step of every journey that we give our best, that the kingdom of God should never be second, but it should be the best for your kingdom, for your glory, for your highest. We thank you that you just cultivate within us a desire to honor you in everything we do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, 95 is in the books. So next week will be 96. Seems like it's taken a long time to get to 100, but we're going to get there before long. So we'll be back next week. And as always, friends, we want to encourage you, go to the website, randylanebunch.org. Under the media link in the main menu, you'll find a plethora of resources free and available. Take advantage of them. Look at prior podcasts we've done. If you scroll back further, you can find my television broadcast that I think still airs out of Pakistan. And then, of course, we have audio, we have articles, a lot of those essays I talked about, they're under that drop-down menu too. We have a healing school that you can listen to, along with PDF files you can download. A lot of resources on that website, so take advantage of it. We'll be back next week with something that the Lord will reveal to us somewhere between now and then. So God bless you guys. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.